Hello friends, so today's episode is going to be a real banger. We are going to be talking about how you can run Stable Diffusion on any computer with the help of Google Colab. And we will be doing it with the Deforum, currently version 0.4. And the great thing about Deforum, which is one of the best, if not the best, Google Collabs for Stable Diffusion, is that it's great at running both still images as well as animations. So let's talk a little bit how to set this up. I'm going to link this in the description down below so you can enter it for yourself. And if you want to make changes to this, just go to File, save a copy in your own drive. You can do all the changes you want. First, we need to go to Hugging Face and download the models. I'm going to link this as well below. You need to be logged in, so create an account and download Stable Diffusion 1.4 package. If you're viewing this video at a later date, just pick the latest version. So this is a pretty big file, so just get on with that. 4 gigabytes. You won't need the full file. That's mainly for training purposes, training the model further. You have EMA weights as well in the standard one. Okay, so let's go back into Stable Diffusion and look at the settings here. So for default, Deforum is going to look at your Google Drive, the folder AI, and models. And this is where we're going to place our models package when we download it. And anything you create will be outputted into AI/Stable Diffusion, so you can change this if you want. The model config is more for advanced users. You can have a custom one if you want. If you set this to custom, you will insert here what config you want to use. Leave this for now. The model checkpoint, the latest version is the 1.4, so we're going to keep it that, like we said previously. If there's a new version, just pick that. And if you have a custom models package, put that in, and this is where you write that. My custom model. If you leave this box checked, it will perform a comparison against checksum for hash file integrity. You don't need to worry about that, just leave it checked in. And the map location is use the GPU or the CPU. Since this is a Google Colab, it's going to be loaded into Google's hardware anyway. So just pick CUDA here. CPU is much slower. Let's look at the animation settings. So if you put none here in animation mode, you will be outputting still images. And that's fine. If you just want to do still images, that's great. Go for it. If you want to make animations, you can make 2D, 3D. You can have a video input if you have a video already. And interpolation is if you want to make a morph between two images. Say you have a cat and you have a dog, and Deforum will merge between these images. Let's set this to 2D for now. The max frames is how many images you will have, or you will create for your animation. And depending on the frames per second you run, this is how long your animation will be. So let's say you run at 30 frames per second and you want 10 seconds of animation, 30 frames per second. So we're just going to take 30 times 10, which is 300. Pretty basic. The border is if you sometimes would, for example, zoom out of your image and there will be no content to the sides. The AI needs to fill that in with something. If you set this to wrap, it will pull pixels from the opposite edge of the image. And if you set this to replicate, it will repeat the edges that you already have and extend them. I've always left this to wrap because I feel it gives better results. When zooming out or when the border needs to be filled, you might get lines with your animations, but this can be a pretty cool effect. You will see it when you start using it. The angle here is only for 2D. And that's a basic rotation, right and left, or clockwise or counterclockwise if you prefer. So this first value is the frame, and this is how much of a degree per frame you want it to rotate. So let's say we want 1 degree rotated clockwise per frame. This would be it. Let's say you want to change this at frame 10. You would want -3 degrees, which would mean a 3-degree counterclockwise per frame. You would start rotating clockwise, and then it would rotate counterclockwise faster. This only works with 2D. If you have 3D set up here, we're going to look at the other settings later. The zoom is moving in and out of a 2D image. The default here is a small zoom because this is set as a multiplier. 1 is no zoom. 1.1 would be a little zoom inwards, and 0.9 would be a little zoom outwards. So here we have a little zoom. If we set this to 1, this will be no zoom. And again, this can be changed per frame. So let's say that we want at frame 100, we could set this to start zooming in. Now how this works is that it will not start zooming at 100. It will start zooming at frame 1 because it'll take 100 frames to reach from 1 to 1.1. So if you wanted your zoom to start at exactly frame 100, you would need to add frame 99 here, set this to 1, then you would have 0 to 99 would be no zoom. And the next frame, it starts zooming. The translation X is moving right and left, and translation Y would move the camera up and down. Translation Z only works for 3D settings, and that would equate to the zoom. So that's moving inwards or outwards of the 3D image. Now let's look at some of the 3D settings. The rotation in X would tilt your image up and down. And this is again degrees per frame. The rotation Y would pan it left to right in degrees per frame. And the rotation Z would roll the image clockwise and counterclockwise, a bit similar to the angle. The noise schedule is how much graininess you would add per frame. And again, this can be set per frame. You can just change this by adding a comma, putting the frame number you want, and another value. The strength schedule is one of the most important settings, and it will change how much your image subsequent to the next image. So it's the amount of presence of your previous frame will influence the next frame. So how you calculate this is you take the sampling steps, which is further down, it's this, and you multiply this by strength, would be in this case, would be 50 times 0.65, and then you would take 50 minus 32.5, which would equate to 17.5. So your starting frame would be 50 steps, and each subsequent frame would be 17.5 steps. So if you change this value up and down, you're going to get more or less changes the next frame moving on. Contrast schedule is basically just adjusting the contrast per frame. The most important settings here are angle zoom, translation X and Y if you're using the 2D setting. And if you're using the 3D setting, you're going to be looking at the rotation 3D, X, Y, Z, and the translation Z. We're going to keep this at 2D for now. Now in the Deforum version 0.4, there's a new setting called diffusion cadence. So basically what happens here, if you set this to 2 and you render frame 1, then it would render frame 3, then it would render frame 5 and 7 and 9, and then it would blend the frames together. So frames 2, 4, 6, etc. would never be rendered. It would be a smoothed blend between them. And this will help, it will save time because you're only rendering half the frames. It could also make your animation messy, but in some cases, it could make it smoother. So you're gonna have to play with this. Usually, a setting between 1 and 3 is what I would recommend. Going higher will yield very inconsistent results. We're gonna leave this at 2 for now, because that's a good default. If you're using 3D, depth warping will be enabled by default, and you can change the midpoint where the depth point is drawn. And this is setting between -1 and +1. And the field of view here, a higher field of view, gives more view of the scene. Padding mode instructs the handling of pixels outside the field of view as they come into the scene. Border here will attempt to use the edges of the canvas as pixels to be drawn. But if you change this to reflection, for example, it will attempt to approximate the image and repeat the pixels or tile them. And if you put this to 0, you will not add any new pixel information. In the sampling mode, you can pick bicubic, bilinear, and nearest. Let's leave this at bicubic for now. If you want to delve more into some of these more advanced settings, I'm going to link a Google Doc made by Scotty Fox and Human of Deforum. Explains in detail all the settings here. Much credit to both Scotty Fox and Human for this. Thank you. If you set the video input up here instead, this setting, the video input, then this is where you would set where the video is. And this value here is how you want to extract the frames from your video. So a value of 1 would take all the frames from your video. If you set this to 2, you would skip every other frame for the sequence. And if you set this to 3, you will skip that number of frames. So the higher you set this, you will start skipping frames. I wouldn't recommend going over 2 for this. If you choose an interpolation, which is this setting here, and we talked about morphing between 2 images, that's the settings you want here. You can change this value. It's the number of frames to transition through between your prompts. If you check this box, it will ignore this number and it will interpolate between your prompts. So let's say you have a prompt here, and that's for frame 0, the start, and you have another prompt, frame 20, and it will interpolate between the start, 20, and then again 30, and then again at 40. If you don't want to interpolate between these frames, you have to uncheck this and set your own. Resume animation is, for example, if you need to stop your rendering or if something crashes, you can just go into your drive, check the file name of your image, take the time string, put that in here, press that box, and it will resume from your last render. Now, I've had some issues with this, and if something crashes, you might get a corrupted image as your last image. And if you get an error trying to resume, try to remove 1, 2, maybe 3 of your last frames and try again, and it might work for you. Down here are the prompts. And you have 2 options. You have prompts and animation prompts. If you set none up here, animation mode, it will run these prompts, the still images. If you set any of the animation settings, these are the prompts that you want. So I've prepared a prompt for the first one, which is a beautiful woman robot android with bright pastel colors. Now I'm going to take that and put that into the next one. And let's change that to a sports car on the beach. Let's do another one. And let's put this as a village of huts with palm trees. And let's do a 4th one. Ship in the ocean. Okay, let's look at the last settings. So this is the size of the animation or the image. If you want a random seed, you can just leave this to -1. But let's say that you have prepared an image that you want your first frame to be. Then you will need to put that seed in here. You have all the samplers available here, and the steps count. Remember that this is just the steps for the first frame. The subsequent frames will be set dependent on the strength schedule. And this can also be changed per frame. The scale is how much the AI will listen to your prompt. Usually a value between 7 and 14 is good, especially if you're using KLMS, which is the default here. Other samplers like Euler Ancestral can work great with smaller sample steps. If you leave all these checked, you will get samples and the settings saved on your drive. And this is that you will see your image further down. I'll show you in the end. This is how many outputs you want per prompt in still images. So this doesn't do anything for animation. And if you change this, you will get a custom folder for your animation. Let's set this to tutorial. Now the seed behavior here is just for running the still images. But for each new image, if you pick iteration, it will change the seed by 1 step further. So let's say you have seed 1. Then each new image will become seed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. If you put fixed, each image will be seed 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. And random, well, each new image will have a random seed. If you check make grid, your still images will be stitched together in a grid. And this is how many rows. We're not going to be using still images for this tutorial. If you have a custom image or a starting point that you want to change, you can press use init. And you can load your image here. And if you have a mask, you can set that here. But then you need to check this box. If you, like me, have painted the mask in reverse sometimes, putting the white as black and vice versa, you will need to press this button. After you've run your animation, you have several options of turning this into a video. You can either take the frames and take them into Premiere or another video processing software, or you can just run them here. Set the desired FPS, let's say 130, and uncheck this box and press run. So let's start our render and see where it takes us. We haven't made a lot of changes to the animation settings, but we have something. We have a zoom that's entering on frame 100. But our animation is not running for that long as of right now. We've set it to 20 frames here, 10 frames here, 10 frames here. So let's change these values. Let's give it at least 100 frames each. And let's change the rotation as well. Set this to 100. Let's set the next one to 200 and rotate clockwise again. Set this to 300. Now we have a clockwise, counterclockwise, clockwise, counterclockwise, clockwise rotation. That will change each 100 frames. And assume that we will remove these and start the zoom at the beginning. So now we have a constant zoom inwards. Let's set the zoom to go outwards at frame 100. And now we need to start everything. If you haven't already, you need to start this. You can go runtime, run all, or you can do this individually. And actually, we forgot to put the model into our Google Drive. So you would want to put that into your drive, folder AI, and folder models. Drag that into here. That will make the forum be able to load the model. Let's start the render. And if you scroll down, we can see that our render has begun. And for the first frame, 50 sample steps. And the next one should be 17 or 18, if our math is correct. We have 17. This is our first frame. And we can see that we have a zoom in going on. And we should have a slight rotation as well. And as you can see here, it's rendering frame 10 now. And the next will be 12 and then 14 because we have our cadence set to 2. So they're creating in between frames and morphing these. You will basically set your render time in half. I'm going to let this run and speed it up, and we'll talk again when it's finished. I wanted to check back in and say that now we're starting to see the zoom outwards in the image. And if you look at the edges, you can see some of the lines I was talking about. And this can be both a cool effect, but if you want to lessen this, you're going to have to move, well, a little bit slower, or if you still want the fast zoom out, you could have a higher frame rate and move slower. Now I feel, however, that we're moving a little fast in regards to the zoom. So let's change this. Let's stop this and let's go back to our settings. Now we've had a couple of frames of a pretty big zoom out. So let's go and set this at frame 130. We'll start zooming in again. I'm going to run the cell again. And now we need to resume from time string. So we need to find our time string. We have the folder here, tutorial. And if you check your image, you can take this here, put that in here, click that box, and run the cell. Now we made the changes. Let's run again. Now we got an error, which is a value error. And because I'm Swedish, but not English, I usually use commas when separating numbers. So that's something that the Deforum doesn't handle well. So we need to go up and change this. And that's this leading change to a dot instead. Let's run the cell to make the change. And now we should be fine. And the animation continues. And we're going to still see a zoom out until frame 130. And now we're going to see a zoom in up until frame 30, when it will be the maximum zoomed in and continue at a constant zoom in. Now let's pause again here, and we're going to make the zoom a little slower. And you can make these changes as you're running the animation and you see what you like and what you don't like. Run the cell again. Resume time string is still set. So start it up again. And now our render of 500 frames has finished. Let's take a look at the result. Let's uncheck this. Change this to 500. And press play. And now a video file is being saved on our drive. You can preview it here. You have a fast zoom in and you fast zoom out, and we're zooming in, and then we should get a slower zoom by the end. And there's our change when we stop and put a slower zoom in. So that's our animation. Now this is a very crude looking animation, but you can change the settings and the prompts to your liking and get whatever results you want. If you like this content, like and subscribe so I can make more of it. And I hope you've had fun. And if you make anything cool from this tutorial, please show me in the comments. Have a great day. Bye bye.